The wind howled across the endless desert, carrying walls of burning sand that stung every inch of exposed skin and blinded the eyes. Mara pulled the ragged cloth tighter around her face, trying to keep the sharp grains out of her mouth and nose. But it was almost useless. Storm was far stronger than anything she had faced before, and it was growing worse with each passing moment she could barely see. A few steps ahead, the world around her was nothing but swirling gold and red the horizon. Lost completely to the violent storm, the air was heavy and hot, and it felt like even her lungs were being filled with sand with every breath. She staggered forward, leaning heavily on her cracked walking staff, and tried to remember where she had last seen the half-buried road markers that had guided her across the barren plains. But they were gone now, swallowed by the moving dunes. Her water bag was nearly empty, and her supplies were down to a single stale piece of dried bread that she had been saving for the night. Mara knew that if she did not find shelter soon, the storm would finish her. The desert never showed mercy, and she was far from any known settlement. Her boots sank deeper into the soft ground as the wind pushed her back. Each step was a struggle, her legs trembling with exhaustion, but she forced herself to keep moving, because to stop was to die, and she had fought too long to let the desert take her. Now she thought of the world before the fall, when cities had touched the sky and oceans had been filled with life. She thought of the faces of people she had once known, but could no longer remember clearly, and that gave her just enough strength to take another step and another, until she noticed something strange in the distance. Through the thick curtain of sand she saw a faint glimmer, like a weak light flickering far ahead. At first she thought it was her imagination, a trick caused by the heat and exhaustion, but as she kept her eyes fixed on it, she realized it was real, and the light was steady. She pushed herself toward it, using every bit of energy left in her body, her arms shielding her face as the wind clawed at her skin. Minutes felt like hours, but the light grew brighter, and soon she could see the outline of a dark shape rising from the dune. It was not a rock or the wreck of some forgotten machine. It was smooth and metallic, half buried under the shifting sands. Mara dropped to her knees in disbelief. The structure had a narrow hatch at its base, almost hidden by layers of sand. She crawled closer, clawing at the dunes with her hands, until she reached the handle and pulled with all her strength. Hatch was stuck. The wind screamed around her, filling her ears and making her hands slip on the frozen metal. She screamed in frustration and threw her entire weight against the door, and finally it gave way with a loud metallic groan. She tumbled inside, landing hard on a smooth floor. The heavy hatch slammed shut behind her, sealing out the storm. For a moment, she simply lay there, gasping for breath, her chest heaving as she realized she was alive. The silence inside was almost overwhelming after the endless roar of the storm. Mara pushed herself up slowly and looked around the place she had stumbled into. It was a wide tunnel with walls of reinforced steel. Dim lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows. The air was dry and still but breathable. She could feel her heart pounding as she stepped forward, unsure if she was truly safe, or if she had just walked into something worse. Her footsteps echoed softly in the tunnel, and she felt the weight of the unknown pressing on her shoulders. This was no ordinary shelter. It was far too large and far too well built for any traveler to have made on their own. It looked like it'd been here for a very long time, hidden from the world above. Mara's mind raced with questions, but she had no answers. She only knew one thing: the storm would have killed her if she had not found this place, and now she was standing at the entrance to something far bigger than she could understand. Her eyes followed the tunnel deeper into the darkness, where faint humming sounds seemed to come from below, as if something alive or something very powerful was waiting there. And though every part of her wanted to rest, she knew she could not stop, not yet, because somewhere in the depths of this hidden shelter, she might find food, water, and perhaps even another living. So Mara stood still for a long moment as her eyes adjusted to the dim light inside the tunnel. The silence pressed down on her in a way that almost felt heavier than the storm she had just escaped. She took a slow breath and started forward. The Floor beneath her boots was made of a smooth metal that gleamed faintly under the overhead lights. The walls were lined with panels covered in dust, and a strange humming sound vibrated. Softly through the air, it was a sound that spoke of hidden machines buried deep in the earth, machines that had not stopped running even after the world above had fallen into ruin. She moved carefully, her hands brushing the cold walls. As she followed the tunnel deeper, it curved slightly downward as if leading her into the heart of the shelter. The further she went, the stronger the faint hum became, and the more she began to notice that the air was warmer and cleaner than it had been at the entrance. It almost smelled alive, like this place had its own breath. She could feel her heartbeat speeding up because she had been alone for so long. And now the possibility of finding someone here both thrilled and terrified her. Footsteps echoed in the silence, and each echo made her think she was being followed. She kept glancing back over her shoulder, but the tunnel behind her was empty. Only darkness waited there, and she forced herself to keep moving forward until she reached a large doorway. The door was half open, and beyond it was a wide chamber filled with soft golden light. Mara stepped inside cautiously, her eyes sweeping the room. Chamber was unlike anything she had seen since the old world fell. The ceiling arched high above her head, and the walls were lined with glowing screens that displayed streams of information in symbols she did not understand. In the center of the room was a table, surrounded by chairs as if people had once gathered here to talk or plan. There were also crates stacked neatly along one side, and when she brushed the dust from one of them, she saw the label food rations stamped on the lid. Her heart leapt with hope. She pried the crate open and found rows of sealed packets. Still fresh, she ripped one open with shaking hands and devoured the contents. The taste was plain, but it felt like life itself after eating. She noticed other signs that this place had once been alive. There were clothes folded neatly in lockers, tools arranged with care, as if their owners had stepped away only moments ago. Yet the dust told her they had been gone for years, maybe decades. She wondered where they had gone, and why this place had been abandoned. Sudden sound froze her in place. It was faint but unmistakable, the sound of footsteps moving slowly through the tunnel. She had come from. Mara's breath caught in her throat. She ducked behind a stack of crates, her heart hammering in her chest. The footsteps grew louder, and she could see a shadow stretching across the floor of the chamber. Someone was coming. The figure stepped into the light, and for a moment, Mara thought it was some kind of armored machine. The person was tall, broad-shouldered, and covered head to toe in a suit of dull metal armor. A helmet concealed their face, and they moved with a calm, steady purpose, as if they belonged here. Mara crouched lower, gripping the edge of the crate, trying not to make a sound. Armored figure stopped in the center of the room and slowly turned their heads, scanning the space they reached up with gloved hands, and unlocked the helmet. There was a hiss of escaping air, and then the helmet came free. Mara's breath caught again, because the face beneath the helmet was human, a man with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to see everything. He looked strong but tired, as if he had carried the weight of this place for a long time. Mara felt a rush of confusion and disbelief. She had thought she was the last one left. The world above had been empty for so long she had stopped hoping to find anyone else, and yet here was another human standing right in front of her. Man's gaze swept the room, and then his eyes locked on the crates where Mara was hiding. She knew she had been seen. He walked forward slowly without raising his voice, but his words carried across the room. "You were not supposed to be here." His tone was calm, but there was something behind it, something that sounded like warning. Mara stepped out from behind the crates, her hands raised slightly to show she meant no harm. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I am not here to hurt anyone. I was lost in the storm. I just needed shelter." The man studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words, and then he nodded slightly. "You found shelter, but you also found something you were never meant to know." His eyes held her steady, and she felt a chill run through her, because there was no anger in his voice, only certainty. "What do you mean?" Mara asked, but the man did not answer right away. He gestured for her to follow him and turned toward a door at the far side of the chamber. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she could trust him. But the thought of returning to the storm was enough to push her forward. She followed him through the door and deeper into the shelter. The corridors beyond were larger and brighter than the first tunnel. The humming sound was stronger now, and she could see heavy doors on either side, each one locked and sealed with warning symbols etched into their surfaces. The man led her past them without a word until they reached a platform that overlooked a vast underground space. Mara gasped as she stepped forward because spread out beneath her was an entire city built under the earth, rows of towering structures connected by glowing bridges and streets where lights burned as bright as stars. She turned to the man, her voice barely a whisper, who built this place. He looked out over the city, his jaw set as he answered, "We did, the last of us, those who refused to die when the world above ended. We hid ourselves away, we waited, and we prepared, and now you are here and everything will change." Mara stared at the city below, her heart racing. She could not believe what she was seeing. She had stumbled not only into a shelter but into the greatest secret humanity had left. Mara stood frozen at the edge of the platform, unable to pull her gaze away from the enormous underground city that stretched out far below her. The sheer size of it made her chest tighten with awe and confusion, because it was impossible for something so large and complex to exist unnoticed for so long. The man beside her remained silent for a moment, his dark eyes scanning the lights of the city like he was measuring something unseen. Mara finally found her voice, though it trembled when she spoke. "How is this possible? I thought everyone was gone. I thought the world was empty." The man turned his head slightly to look at her, and his expression carried the weight of 1,000 secrets. "Humanity is not gone," he said slowly. "We are still here, but only because we learned to hide. We built places like this deep under the earth when the surface became unlivable. The shelters became our homes, our fortresses, and our prisons, all at the same time. And the ones who remain have been preparing ever since." Mara struggled to understand his words because for years she had wandered the empty wastelands believing she was the only one left. She had seen the ruins of great cities and the bones of people who had died long ago. She had felt the loneliness of a world with no voices, no laughter, no human presence. And now to stand here and hear that hundreds, maybe thousands of people had been alive the entire time, it was almost too much to believe. "Why would you hide like this?" she asked, her voice rising with confusion. "Why let everyone think humanity was extinct? Why not come back to the surface and rebuild?" The man's jaw tightened, and there was a sharp edge to his reply. "Because the ones who destroyed the old world would never have let us rebuild. They think we are gone, and that belief keeps us safe as long as they believe humanity is finished. They do not look for us. They do not destroy what is left." Mara's heart skipped a beat. "The ones who destroyed the old world," she whispered. "Do you mean the alien fleets, the stories I heard about them were true?" The man nodded slowly. "They came from beyond the stars with weapons we could not match. They burned the skies and poisoned the oceans. And then they left when they believed the job was done. They did not know we had already gone underground, and that is how we survived." Mara stared at the glowing city below and felt a wave of fear wash over her, because she understood now why this place was hidden so carefully. If those aliens discovered even a single shelter, they would return and finish the work they had started. She turned to the man, panic creeping into her words. "Does my being here put you in danger? Could I have been followed?" His expression grew grim. "You crossed the surface in the middle of a storm," he said quietly. "There is always a chance you were seen, and if you were, then everything we have built could be at risk." Mara felt the air grow colder around her. She had not thought about that possibility while she was struggling to survive in the sandstorm. She had only wanted to live. But now she wondered if her presence here could doom the last of humanity. She swallowed hard and asked, "What will you do with me?" The man studied her for a long moment before answering. "I am Elias," he said. "My duty is to protect this shelter and everyone who lives here, but I also know what it means to be alone in the wastelands. I will not throw you back into that life, not unless I must." Mara's Heart raced with a mix of relief and unease. She followed Elias as he led her down through the winding corridors of the city. The deeper they went, the more she saw signs of life, people moving in the streets, tending to gardens beneath artificial lights, children laughing in small playgrounds. All of them looked strong, but wary, like they knew that at any moment, the fragile peace they lived in could be shattered by forces. Above, Elias brought her to a large hall at the center of the city, and there he introduced her to a small group of leaders. They gathered around a circular table made of stone and steel, their faces serious as Elias explained who she was and how she had arrived. Many of them looked at her with suspicion, whispering to each other about the danger she might have brought. One older woman stood and asked sharply, "How can we be sure she is not being tracked? What if the enemy is already on their way?" Mara felt the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on her. She raised her voice, though it shook with fear. "I did not know this place existed. I did not lead anyone here. I only wanted to survive." Some of the leaders seemed moved by her words, but others remained doubtful. Elias silenced them with a firm gesture. "We cannot know for certain whether she was followed, but we will find out. We must be ready for anything." Mara felt a chill run through her as she realized what he meant. These people had survived for decades by being careful, and now her presence had disturbed that balance. She thought about the wasteland she had left behind and the endless days of wandering alone. She did not want to return to that life, but she also did not want to be the reason this hidden world was destroyed that night. Elias led her through the city to a small room where she could rest for the first time in days. She lay awake on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as the faint hum of the shelter's machines filled the silence. She thought of the people she had seen, the children who had never known the sky, and she felt a deep ache in her chest. In the darkness, Elias' words came back to her. "Humanity is not gone. We are still here." But for how long? She wondered if the storm outside had truly hidden her tracks, or if unseen eyes had already found her. She knew one thing for certain: everything in her life had changed from the moment she opened that hatch and stepped inside this shelter, and whatever secrets this place held, they would soon become her secrets too. Whether she was ready or not, Mara woke in the middle of the night. Though she was not sure why at first, the hum of the great machines that powered the underground city was still steady in the background, and the air in her small room was still and warm. But there was something different in the silence, a strange vibration that she could feel in her bones. She sat up and listened carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. And then she heard it, a distant alarm so faint it could almost be mistaken for the wind. She pushed open the door and stepped into the corridor outside, where she found people rushing in every direction, their faces tight with fear. Lights flashed along the walls, painting everything in red. As the alarm grew louder, Mara caught the arm of a woman passing by and asked, "What is happening?" The woman shook her head. "We have been detected. The enemy is above. They are coming." Mara's stomach dropped, and she felt the cold wave of dread rush through her. She ran toward the central hall where she had first seen the leaders gathered, and there she found Elias giving orders, his voice calm but sharp like a blade. He turned as soon as he saw her and motioned for her to follow without wasting a breath. "We do not have time," he said. "They have started drilling through the sand above our outer gates." Mara struggled to keep up with him as he led her down a long stairway that opened into a massive chamber. She stopped short when she saw what was inside. Rows of heavy weapons sealed inside armored crates, soldiers in combat armor rushing to take positions, and walls covered with control panels. She realized this was the shelter's last line of defense. Elias handed her a rifle, a weapon far more advanced than anything she had seen before, and she hesitated, her hands trembling. "I do not know how to use this." Elias placed his hands on hers, steadying her. "You will learn quickly. Stay near me and do exactly as I say." The room shook violently as a thunderous sound echoed from far above, the drilling machines breaking through the layers of sand and steel. Mara's heart raced with every vibration. She could feel the enemy drawing closer and closer. She glanced around at the soldiers beside her, their faces Set and unflinching, as if they had been preparing for this moment, their entire lives. Elias guided her to a defensive platform, overlooking one of the main corridors that led to the upper gates. The soldiers had set up barricades and automated turrets along the corridor, and the faint hum of the turrets charging filled the air. He looked at her with steady eyes. When the breach comes, they will rush in fast, he said. You aim and you fire. Do not stop no matter what happens. Mara nodded, though fear twisted inside her. She gripped the weapon tightly and tried to push away the thoughts of failure. Then a deafening crash split the air as the enemy finally broke through the outer gates, and the corridor ahead was suddenly filled with light and noise. They came in waves. Strange armored figures that moved with alien precision, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. The first volley of fire struck the barricades, sending sparks flying. Soldiers shouted orders as they returned fire, and the corridor erupted into chaos. Mara aimed at the nearest enemy and pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and a flash of light tore through the alien's armor. Dropping it instantly, her breath caught in her throat, but there was no time to think. She fired again and again, each shot adding to the storm of battle around her. She could hear Elias beside her, his voice calm and commanding as he directed the defense. The enemy pressed forward relentlessly, and though the turrets cut them down in great numbers, more kept coming. It felt like an endless tide. The shelter trembled as explosions shook the ground. Overhead, pieces of metal and stone rained down from the ceiling. Mara ducked behind cover and reloaded her weapon, her hands shaking with adrenaline. She could see fear in the soldiers' eyes, but also determination. They were fighting for everything they had ever known, and for a future that might not exist if they failed. Elias moved forward to a control panel and activated a series of commands. Lights flared along the walls as hidden defenses came online. Automated drones rose from the floor and joined the battle, their energy cannons cutting through the enemy ranks. The corridor was filled with light and noise so bright and loud it was almost impossible to think. Mara stood and fired again, her mind focused only on survival. Enemy reached the inner barricade, and the fighting became close and brutal. Mara swung her rifle like a club when one of the armored figures leapt at her. She barely managed to stay on her feet, but Elias was there a moment later, pulling her back and striking the creature down with a blade of energy. The look in his eyes was fierce and unyielding, and Mara felt a surge of strength just seeing him. Fight then, a voice crackled over the shelter's communication system. We have sealed the upper gate, but more enemy forces are circling above. If we do not finish this soon, they will breach again. Elias cursed under his breath and turned to Mara. The main defense system is nearly charged. We have to hold them until it is ready. Mara nodded and took her place at the barricade, the weight of fear pressing against her chest as the next wave of enemies stormed forward. She fired until her arms ached, until her throat was raw from shouting, until the world narrowed to the sound of her weapon and the flashes of light around her. Finally, Elias shouted, "It is ready. Everyone fall back now." He slammed his palm on the activation switch, and a blinding wave of energy surged through the corridor. Every enemy caught inside was torn apart by the force. The silence that followed was heavy and filled with the smell of burned metal and dust. Mara collapsed to her knees, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Elias pulled her up and looked into her eyes. "We are not finished yet," he said. "The enemy above knows where we are, and they will not stop now. But you fought with us, and you survived, and now you understand why this place must remain hidden." Mara looked around at the tired but determined faces of the soldiers who had fought beside her. She understood now that this shelter was not just a refuge. It was a fortress and a promise that humanity would rise again. The corridor was filled with the heavy scent of dust and scorched metal as the defenders moved slowly among the wreckage, their faces weary but their eyes still sharp. Mara followed Elias as he led her away from the shattered barricades. Her legs felt like stone, and her arms ached from holding the weapon for so long, yet a strange fire burned inside her, a spark of determination. she had not felt in years. She glanced at the soldiers around her and saw the same look in their faces. They were tired, but they were not broken. Elias brought her into the central command chamber where the leaders were, already gathered, speaking in low voices about the next steps. Mara stood quietly at the edge of the room listening as they discussed the situation. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his jaw, spoke grimly. The enemy ships are still above. They will return in greater numbers. We cannot stay here forever. Older woman, who had doubted Mara when she first arrived, turned to Elias with eyes that held both fear and resolve. The fleet is ready, she said. If there was ever a time to act, it is now. Elias nodded, his jaw set. I know, but we must be sure we are ready, because once we take this step there will be no going back. Mara's confusion must have shown on her face because Elias motioned for her to follow him. He led her down a long elevator that descended deeper into the earth than any place she had seen in the shelter. The hum of the great machines grew louder as they reached the bottom, and the doors opened to reveal a cavern so vast that Mara's breath caught in her throat. Before her lay rows upon rows of sleek starships, their hulls gleaming in the artificial light, each one armed with weapons far more advanced than anything she had seen on the surface. Engineers worked around the ships, performing last-minute checks and adjustments, while soldiers loaded supplies into the cargo holds. The air was alive with energy and purpose. Mara could hardly speak. Elias stood beside her and spoke quietly now. You see what we have been building all these years. We did not simply hide from the enemy. We prepared for the day we would rise and take back what was ours. Mara stepped forward, unable to tear her eyes away from the sight. It was not just a fleet. It was a symbol of hope. She thought about the lonely years she had spent wandering the wastelands, believing humanity was nothing more than a memory, and the weight of it all nearly brought her to tears. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder and looked at her with steady eyes. You came to us by chance, but now you have a choice. You can leave with one of the scouting parties and live a quiet life far from the fight, or you can stay and help us finish what we started. We will not force you, but you must decide. Mara felt the answer rising in her chest before he had even finished speaking. She thought about the faces of the children she had seen in the underground city, faces that had never felt the warmth of the sun. She thought about the empty ruins of the world above and the endless silence of the wasteland, and she knew she could not turn her back on this chance to make it right. I will stay, she said, her voice strong. I will fight. Elias gave a small nod, as if he had expected nothing less. And together, they walked back toward the command platform. The leaders announced the plan. The fleet would launch at dawn, using the cover of the remaining storm to break through the enemy blockade. Mara was assigned to one of the forward ships, and the soldiers welcomed her with quiet respect. When the time came, the entire shelter gathered in the great cavern to watch the fleet depart. Mara stood at the boarding ramp of her ship and looked around one last time at the underground city that had given her hope. It no longer felt like a prison. It felt like the heart of something greater, something that could not be destroyed. Engines roared to life, and the ships began to rise one by one into the launch shafts that led to the surface. Mara strapped herself into her seat, the vibration of the ship thrumming through her bones. The captain's voice rang through the comm system. We do this for all who came before, and for all who will come after. The ship shot upward through the narrow tunnel, and then suddenly the sky exploded into view. The endless desert spread out below, and above it hung the dark shapes of enemy ships waiting to strike. Mara felt fear, but it was different now. It was sharpened into resolve as the fleet formed. Up in the air around her, the first wave of enemy fire came down like a storm of light, but the human ships answered with their own weapons. Blazing bright, the sky was filled with streaks of energy and the sound of engines screaming through the atmosphere. Mara manned the turret station on her ship, focusing on each target as it came into range and firing with all the strength in her heart. Battle raged for what felt like hours, though Mara knew it could only have been minutes. One enemy ship after another fell from the sky until at last the survivors turned and fled, retreating into the stars, chased by the relentless human fleet. Cheer erupted through the cum system as the realization spread. They had won the first victory humanity had. Struck back for the first time since the old world had fallen as the fleet regrouped. Elias's voice came through the cum to everyone listening. This is only the beginning, he said today. We proved we are not broken, we are not finished, we will rebuild our world, and no one will ever erase us again. Mara looked out at the rising sun, breaking through the last traces of the storm, and felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. The sky was vast and open, and it belonged to them once more. For the first time since the fall, Mara believed that humanity would not just survive, it would rise. The end.